So you could easily power all of China with solar.
All of China with solar.
Easily, yeah. Yeah, no, easy.
The world's most populous country.
Yep, definitely.
Wow.
Yeah.
People have called you the real Tony Stark. Okay, you've got your finger in so many different advanced technologies. As I said, SpaceX, Tesla, now you've got Solar City and the solar pack that people put in their houses.
Eventually you can transform Mars into an Earth-like planet.
How would you do that?
You'd warm it up.
How would you warm Mars up? You know, it's a
the
long
fast
way away from the sun.
There's the fast way and the slow way. Fast way is drop thermonuclear weapons over the poles.
You're a supervillain. That's what a supervillain does.
Yeah.
Billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk puts his money where his mouth is.
I am personally guaranteeing that value and standing behind that guarantee with all of my assets.
His greatest asset is his ability to take this big, big dream and make other people believe that it's true.
The determined engineer's big dreams transformed 3 industries.
I'm just wishing to any entities that are listening, please bless this launch.
You know, here's an immigrant from South Africa coming to America to say, you know, NASA, that whole rocket thing you're doing with the space shuttle, I got a better way.
His better way meant risking everything.
We had maybe about a week's worth of cash in the bank, or less. I had to make a choice then that either I took all of the capital that I had left from the sale of PayPal to eBay and invest that in Tesla, or Tesla would die.
Others weren't so willing to take a chance on him or his companies.
You put $90 billion, like 50 years worth of breaks into solar and wind, to Solyndra and Fisker and Tesla and Enter1. I mean, I had a friend who said you don't just pick the winners and losers, you pick the losers.
It's very unlikely that the Tesla investment is ever repaid to the taxpayers. Electric vehicles are really not possible in ways that would be effective for most consumers still.
But his bets have paid off.
We didn't just repay the principal, we actually repaid it with interest and a bonus payment. So ultimately the U.S. taxpayer actually made a profit of over $20 million on this loan.
Elon Musk has even bigger dreams that might just take him farther than anyone else.
Elon Musk goes a step further. Earth's not big enough. With SpaceX, he literally wants to go to Mars.
And long term, I'd really love to go to Mars. That's the overarching goal of SpaceX. When I was a little kid, I was really scared of the dark. But then I sort of came to understand, okay, well, dark just means really the absence of photons in the visible wavelength, 400 to 700 nanometers.
It's hard to believe that entrepreneur Elon Musk was ever afraid of anything.
And Elon said, darkness is merely the absence of light.
Then I thought, well, it's really silly to be afraid of a lack of photons. Then I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore after that.
Once one of the kids said to him, look at the moon, it's 1 billion miles away. And he said, well, no, it's actually under 250,000 miles away. And they said, oh, Elon!
Entrepreneur Elon Musk has spent his life proving people wrong. Growing up in South Africa, Musk was the oldest of 3 children and started school a year early. His father was an engineer. His mother, May, was a model and nutritionist.
He was the youngest, he made about 2 days, and the shortest. And then he was this brilliant boy, and so people didn't really like him.
So I was this little bookwormy kid and probably a bit of a smart aleck. So this is a recipe for disaster.
Not that he told me much about it, but he was picked on quite a bit.
So I just like read a lot of books and tried to stay out of people's way during school.
And so his social life was much less than my other 2 kids. And that's a typical nerd.
I read all the comics I could buy or that they'd let me read at the bookstore before chasing me away. I read everything I could get my hands on from when I woke up to when I went to sleep. At one point I got
I really ran out of books and started reading the encyclopedia.
And he has a photographic memory, so he could remember everything. Anytime I had a question, my daughter Tosca would say, "Call Genius Boy."
His brother, Kimball Musk.
When Elon was 10 years old, he got tested by IBM, and he was found to have one of the highest aptitudes they'd ever seen for computer programming.
I tried taking some computer classes, but I was way ahead of the teacher, so it didn't really help. So I started programming a space game called Blastar.
Musk, already thinking like an entrepreneur, figured out how to sell his game.
And I don't think they realized I was 12.
We decided we were going to open an arcade out near our high school. We were big into video games. We figured that it was going to be a huge hit. We got a lease on a building. We got the arcade provider to deliver the equipment. And the only thing we needed to do by the end of it was get the city to approve what we were doing.
But an adult had to apply for a city permit, and they hadn't told their parents what they were up to.
And of course, they told us we were not going to be opening up an arcade.
Max Chafkin is a technology and business journalist who has profiled Elon Musk several times.
Really, the most amazing thing about his childhood is his escape from South Africa.
I remember thinking and saying that America is where great things are possible, more than any other country in the world. It's a little cliche, but it's true. America is the land of opportunity.
By moving, Musk would also avoid mandatory service in South Africa's army.
Growing up in apartheid South Africa was pretty surreal. I mean, we didn't support that government, we didn't believe in it. And so the idea of actually going to the military service was really out of the question.
I told my parents I was going to Canada, and they tried to convince me not to leave.
And off he flew, and I thought, wow, he's so independent. Of course, as soon as he lands, he calls me and he says, "What do I do now?"
So I bought a bus ticket from Montreal to Vancouver, and that allowed me to kind of see Canada, at least from the highway.
He worked at odd jobs across the country before settling at Queen's College in Toronto.
In fact, when I went to college, I rarely went to class. I'd just read the textbook and then show up for exams. The big appeal of the university was being able to date girls my own age. I actually met my first wife there.
Musk got an engineering and business degree from the University of Pennsylvania and a scholarship to go to Stanford. Silicon Valley was the promised land.
I really wanted to kind of go where the really exciting breakthroughs were occurring.
Elon had this ability to look at the world, go, this is a real problem that's going to happen in 20 years.
He looked around and he saw that the world-changing stuff was not happening at Stanford.
I didn't even go to class. I called the chairman of the department and said, I'd like to try starting this internet company. It probably won't succeed, and so when it fails, I want to make sure that I can still come back.
My kids do funny things, and I'm never too concerned about them because, you know, if Elon wanted to drop out of college, he could always go back.
My brother was in Canada at the time, and I said, look, I think we should try to create an internet company. So he came down and joined me.
He had, $2,000, no friends, barely enough money for an apartment. I think he told me he was showering at the gym because they didn't have a shower where he was living.
We just got some futons that there were couches during the day and then turned into beds at night.
Steve Jurvetson is a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley.
I first met Elon and Kimball Musk, his brother, back in the mid-90s when they first set foot in California. I think they'd been here for about a week, and they were pitching a new company called Zip2. Silicon Valley in the mid-90s and late 90s was a gold rush. People were flocking to the region to find riches, to make it in the internet business.
Musk came up with an idea to bring newspapers into the digital age. He took a CD-ROM Yellow Pages, some mapping software, wrote a little code, and put it all together to create the first online city listings.
Elon was more the business mastermind, I was more the sales guy.
I still had my core programming skills, so I was able to write the software needed for the first company.
Now, when Elon was starting Zip2, keep in mind, the internet was just a couple of years old. Most local businesses were not on the internet. And the way you found a local business was you opened up the Yellow Pages.
The thought was the media companies, like the newspapers, are going to need help coming online and building lots of functionality into their websites.
We had someone literally throw a Yellow Pages book at us and tell us, do you think you'll ever replace this? And we thought the guy was crazy. Because not only were we going to replace this, but that's not where it ended. It would keep going from there.
It wasn't long before media companies across the country were signing up.
And so we were able to get as investors and customers the New York Times Company, Hearst, Knight Ridder, and a number of other companies.
In 1999, the Alta Vista division of Compaq bought Zip2 for $307 million in cash and $34 million in stock options. Musk was just 28 years old.
I thought, that's crazy. Why would somebody pay such a huge amount of money for this little company that we have? It actually obviously turned out very well for them financially, so obviously they knew a lot more about it than I did.
When the kids sold Zip2, it was the most exciting day. We couldn't believe it because you don't know in the internet world if you're going to, you know, make $1 million or die tomorrow.
In February 1999, Elon Musk sold his first company. At 28, he joined the ranks of Silicon Valley millionaires.
Zip2 was acquired by Compaq for a little over $200 million, and I made, I think, about $21 or $22 million as a result of that, which was a phenomenal amount of money for me.
It was obviously a financial windfall. It was super fun to go out and buy some cool toys.
There is, gentlemen, the fastest car in the world.
One of his first things to do is go out and get a big sports car. He comes from a family that really enjoys racing in vehicles, and he got one of the highest performance cars money could buy at the time. It was a McLaren F1, and proceeded to enjoy that around the Bay Area, let's say, a number of adventures and risk-taking moves with his driving.
While I'm sure it felt, you know, wonderful to have all this money and to have people recognizing success, I think he was also frustrated that this company hadn't become as great as he wanted it to be. It hadn't changed the world. It had just slightly altered the course of newspaper history, which I think from his point of view is, you know, kind of a piddling accomplishment.
So I certainly had the choice at that point of retiring and, you know, buying an island somewhere and sipping Mai Tais, but that was not of interest to me at all.
There really wasn't a choice of we weren't going to do anything. It was just really what we were going to do next. In Elon's case in particular, it was really just a stepping stone.
The goal in doing my second internet company was to create something that would have a profound effect. And it seems to me that the financial sector had not seen a lot of innovation on the internet. And money is really just an entry in a database. And it's low bandwidth. It seems like it's something that should lend itself to innovation.
He was very rich. I mean, just more money than most people could dream. And he took almost no time in between that sale and starting the company that became PayPal.
Musk's new company created something we take for granted today. It changed the way the world buys things, the way money is transferred from one person to another.
At the time, transactions were very slow. People would have to mail checks to each other. So it could take weeks just to complete a single transaction.
With his windfall from the sale of Zip2, Musk quickly turned around and founded X.com to make electronic cash transfers possible. But his new company collided with a rival mobile payment company called Confinity.
And they were really competing against each other, and the real enemy at the end of the day was eBay.
We combined our efforts in order to compete effectively against eBay's built-in system.
They called the new company PayPal.
When he looked at PayPal, his goal was not to create a place you could do person-to-person payments. His goal was to transform the financial industry.
We're able to become the leading payment system in the world, and then eBay finally threw in the towel and acquired PayPal in early 2002.
Musk and his partners sold PayPal for $1.5 billion. Musk was the largest shareholder and walked away with $180 million. He was 30 years old.
I could have bought probably a chain of islands, but that again, that was obviously just not of interest to me.
Islands weren't of interest, but outer space was.
It's just a much more exciting, inspiring future if we're out there exploring the stars, as opposed to a future where we are forever confined to Earth. I was thinking, well, I wonder when we're going to Mars. You know, when is NASA going to go to Mars? And I went to the NASA website, and there was no plan to go to Mars, and no plan to really even take the next step in space exploration.
This is Elon saying he wants to go and enable this human civilization to leave the planet Earth. It's about as big a vision as you could possibly imagine. And that's going to require funds, and he has enough funds to go do it, so he's going to go do it.
Musk had the outrageous idea that private enterprise could actually re-energize space travel. And in June 2002, he founded Space Exploration Technologies, or SpaceX.
Elon was the only funder of the company for its early years. Another incredibly risky move to say, nobody on the planet thinks this idea is financeable. I'm going to fund all of it myself, to the tune of almost $100 million, which was the majority of his net worth at the time, into a dream to take on the military-industrial complex. You know, here's an immigrant from South Africa coming to America to say, you know, NASA, that whole rocket thing you're doing with the space shuttle, I've got a better way.
I actually traveled to Russia 3 times to look at buying a refurbished ICBM without the nuke. And I came to the conclusion that the thing that was really holding us back from making much more progress in space was really that rockets had not evolved since the 60s.
So the trick isn't figuring out how to get to orbit, it's figuring out how to get to orbit cheaply.
So I had to come up with lower-cost ways to produce engines, the primary structure, the electronics, do the launch operation, as well as run the company with very little overhead. And the sum of inventions in all those areas is what has led us to roughly 3- to 4-fold improvement over the cost of other rockets in the United States.
What SpaceX has been very successful at is taking basically off-the-shelf technology, stuff that was developed by NASA 50 years ago, and streamlining it. So in that way, he's kind of the Henry Ford of space, because Henry Ford didn't invent the automobile, he just figured out how to make the automobile, commercially viable.
Musk was more than just an entrepreneur.
If you ask Elon how he managed to teach himself rocket science, he'll just look at you very seriously and just say very quietly, "I read a lot of books."
"32-year-old Elon Musk had his next big idea at his family's annual visit to Burning Man, the counterculture desert happening. Although still fascinated by rockets and fast cars, he wanted to find a way to end Earth's addiction to fossil fuels.
I was the one that suggested the idea of going into the solar power arena to Lyndon and Peter Wright, my cousins.
He basically hands this idea to his cousins and says, "If you want to start this, I will fund you, and it'll be your company, but I'll be the chairman." And they say, "Okay," and it works almost perfectly.
What they have figured out is that if you sort of do 100 things 10% better in the area of solar cell installation for homeowners, you can dramatically consolidate an industry that's currently a bunch of mom and pop shops. So what Solar City did was they said, how about no money down? You want solar cells? We'll just put them in. You don't pay a cent. Right? It's like leasing a car, but even better.
Solar City started in 5 western states and soon grew into the largest solar service provider in the U.S.
The solar cells keep going. Solar City then owns those at the end of the lease. So it's a fascinating business model where in the long term they may become the largest energy generator in America off all of these rooftops.
But renewable energy was just one part of a much bigger goal. Musk had a more ambitious plan for a sustainable future.
He had this idea that he wanted to make electric cars, help humanity get off fossil fuels.
And so Solar City is about sustainable energy creation, whereas Tesla is about sustainable energy consumption.
In April 2004, Musk helped launch Tesla with $6.3 million of his own money. It was the first auto industry startup in decades, and the only one born in Silicon Valley.
And it's really pretty simple. It's, make a high-priced car at low volume, because that's essentially the only thing we could afford to do. And then step 2 is a medium-priced car at medium volumes, and step 3 is a low-priced car at high volumes.
Tesla's plan was to introduce a high-end, high-performance product to first attract outliers, then make an affordable car for the masses. Tesla's co-founder and first CEO, Martin Eberhard.
We expect to change the way people think about electric cars with this car, and that we hope to open the market for us to sell other electric cars. But we also know that if you start off by saying, let's first change human nature and make everybody drive crummy little cars, that doesn't work. So instead, let's build a car that people want to drive. Let's build a car that's hot and desirable and beautiful, and convince people that driving an electric car is not a compromise.
Its idea of actually going in and putting it in a high-end car and breaking the mold of what an electric car was exciting. This is no longer going to be a golf cart. This is going to be a Ferrari.
Any cops watching?
Nope. Coast is clear.
When we first saw Tesla, it had a good explanation for how they get to market without having to spend exorbitant amount of money, how they would create a brand and an object of desire in consumers, and each part of the story clicked together.
He talked about Silicon Valley smarts being able to show Detroit how to do something that Detroit didn't think was possible.
It's batteries, it's drive electronics, it's electric motors. Those are skills that are present in Silicon Valley and not present in Detroit.
Tesla's revolutionary technology for the Roadster started with a computer battery as the power source for the automobile. J.B. Straubel, Tesla's chief technology officer, was the main designer of the electric powertrain.
For the first time, it was possible to drive over 200 miles and have performance that was directly competitive with what a gasoline car could do. And Tesla was the first company to take those principles and put that into practice and try it.
California Governor Schwarzenegger showed up for the Roadster's 2006 coming out party.
I test drove this one, it's hot.
He bought one. So did Leonardo DiCaprio and George Clooney. But could Musk sell regular customers on his idea?
At that time, there was very little activity in the auto industry in electric vehicles. We were in the age of the large SUV. So it was a little unusual to hear about this company in California that was planning to come to market with a high-end all-electric sports car.
We were very passionate about trying to make sure that this car was going to just throw down the gauntlet on what the technology could do and really prove to the world that electric vehicles, could be incredibly fast and could have incredibly long range. There was kind of a sense of adventure, doing these things for the first time and doing it in a really scrappy way. We did some of the very first battery packs in my garage in Menlo Park before we actually were able to rent a real office.
The big issue for Tesla, as with all electric cars, has been the batteries, their cost, and how long they last. Eric Noble is president of CarLab, an automotive consulting firm that evaluates new cars and trucks.
American consumers are very ready for battery electric vehicles. Unfortunately, battery electric vehicles aren't ready for American consumers.
The first results at Tesla seem to support this gloomy forecast.
Tesla, when we first started out, the thought was simple and really, obviously, in retrospect, quite naive, which was to make use of some technology that we develop ourselves, but also some technology that we'd license from AC Propulsion, put that together and create an electric sports car that would be compelling. So, let's see, where did that fall apart?
It fell apart when the team told Musk that the projected cost had skyrocketed from $65,000 to $140,000. As the problems mounted, Musk faced a do-or-die decision at Tesla. He would have to choose between investing his PayPal payoff or let his new company collapse.
And Elon was looking at this and saying, the dream is still there, but oh my gosh, what have I got? I've got to get this under control.
By 2007, Tesla was running out of money, fast. No one wanted to step up to save the unproven automobile startup. Elon Musk had to take the leap alone.
We had to make some pretty dramatic changes. I essentially recapitalized the business and invested about twice what we'd originally expected. What we originally expected as the outer limit.
Basically, Tesla got to this point where they only had enough money in the bank for a couple of months, and there's nobody around who are willing to put more money in.
I took all of my reserve capital and invested into Tesla, which was very scary because, it would obviously be quite sad to have the fruits of my labor with Zip2 and PayPal not amount to anything. But there was no question that I would do that in my own mind because Tesla was too important to let die. I'm available 24/7 to help solve issues. Right. Call me 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning, I don't care.
We had to go in and make some really hard decisions on personnel changes, and Elon really had to dedicate his time to the company.
I want names named. So if someone's always on the hot seat and is always the root cause for problems, they will not be part of this organization long term. It's not okay to be unhappy and part of this company. And so if somebody can't get happy, get divorced. Right.
Musk and his board replaced Martin Eberhard, one of the co-founders who had been running Tesla.
And I think we kind of really exceeded the level that Eberhard could handle. And that became apparent in 2007.
We either were going to have to shut the company down, or Elon was going to have to take over as CEO.
It was actually a process of building a company as well as building a car. You know, a lot of people that fit in very well with a company when it was extremely small, didn't end up, fitting in as well when it was larger.
Eberhard didn't go quietly. He sued Musk for libel, slander, and breach of contract.
I believe that I was scapegoated to take the blame for the programs that were not run well.
Musk resolved the disputes through mediation, but his company was in serious financial trouble. In September 2007, Musk flew to Germany with a scheme to raise extra cash by forging an alliance with Daimler-Mercedes.
Daimler is the company that invented the internal combustion engine car, the maker of Mercedes, Smart, and their endorsement carries a great deal of weight. So that was just a very important moment.
He had to convince the company that Tesla could supply battery packs for its cars. They were skeptical.
Really, the key thing with Daimler was to demonstrate hardware that worked.
If they can't touch it, they can't drive it, it's not particularly real.
He pushed his team to retrofit a Daimler smart car with Tesla's electric motor. But first, they had to find one.
The challenge of converting a smart car to electric was doubly difficult because we couldn't find a smart car.
The smart car was not for sale in the United States, so we had to send somebody down to Mexico to buy a smart car, bring one to the US, and then the smart car is really tiny, so we had to fit a motor, power electronics, and charger and everything in the smart car.
The challenge was daunting. To replace the smart car's gas engine with a Tesla drivetrain and battery, fit it in the tiny space under the hood, and do it all in less than 4 weeks.
We didn't have much time at all. We knew that from the beginning, and we kind of prepared for almost battle and set up a war room in the shop.
They worked around the clock, stealing naps on the factory floor, right up to the deadline.
The Daimler executives arrived not at all convinced that it made any sense to work with an American car company, let alone a little tiny American car company in Silicon Valley.
While waiting for Daimler's decision, Musk brought in one of the world's leading automobile designers to help create his next project, a modern and sexy family sedan, which he called the Model S.
Originally with the Model S, I thought, well, let's have Henrik Fisker, who had a design studio, do the styling. We paid him a pretty good sum of money to do that. Curiously enough, the designs that he worked on, that he came up with for us, were terrible. And what he didn't tell us was that he was actually working on a competing car company.
Tesla officials claimed that perhaps Henrik had come in to learn what Tesla was doing, while all along he was planning to form his own company, do his own vehicle.
We were pretty upset with him for basically taking what were at the time the original specifications for the Model S and then going and sharpening a business plan to create that same car.
Tesla sued him, he sued Tesla, and there was all kinds of, infighting.
Henrik Fisker wouldn't grant Bloomberg an interview, but he told us that, "I believe there is enough space in the market for several new car companies that pursue a new type of electrified powertrain with different philosophies." In November 2008, the court ruled in Fisker's favor. It was a setback for Musk, who was also going through a tough time personally. After 8 years of marriage and 5 children, Elon and Justine Musk divorced.
I got divorced, personal life in somewhat of a shambles, and in addition getting attacked by some in the media, my ex-wife, every bad thing you could imagine.
There was more bad news when his bold space transport company SpaceX again failed to get a rocket into orbit.
The first launch didn't get very far, got about a minute up, and then there was an engine fire, and that was it. The second flight actually did make it to space, but not to orbit. And then also flight 3, we didn't get all the way to orbit.
He started saying, "I've got enough money for 3 cracks at it." He put $100 million of his own money, and he sort of hinted at the idea that after 3, if he didn't make it, it would be over. SpaceX would die.
Musk burned through the $100 million he had sunk into SpaceX. Now he was on his way back to the drawing board.
3 days after the failure, he announced, first that he knew what was wrong. He announced that they'd raise money to finance a fourth launch, and the fourth launch was going to happen in a matter of months, which in the rocket industry was a crazy announcement.
We were able to solve the problems, and then just as we'd solved those problems, we ran smack into the worst economic recession since the Great Depression.
It's been one of the darkest days on Wall Street in recent memory. Stock markets falling the most since 9/11, the Dow off more than 500 points.
This is what financial Armageddon looks like. Red screens that scream sell, sell, sell.
It was a week that shook Wall Street and indeed the world.
And a realization that the economy may still head into a deeper downturn.
As 2008 drew to a close, Elon Musk faced the worst crisis of his career. All three of his companies appeared to be in free fall.
The worst point was probably just the weekend before Christmas in 2008.
We had the economic tsunami take place and made things even worse. If it wasn't needed, we had to shut it down and just figure out how do we get through the stock period and not go bankrupt.
General Motors shares falling to more than a 20-year low after Goldman cut the automaker's rating to sell on a worsening sales outlook.
That was tough. It was obviously an economic period that saw the bankruptcy of General Motors and Chrysler, and there we were, a young company selling a very optional car. I mean, it was really people don't need a $100,000 sports car. I never thought it was possible for me to have a nervous breakdown, but if it was possible for me to have a nervous breakdown, that was about as close as I was going to come.
When Elon was going through his sad period, I was so sad. I felt like I had a hole in my heart, and there's nothing you can do. You just hurt so much, and I just didn't see him getting out of it. He was just so sad. And then the next thing I get this call saying, "Ma, you can't believe it. I've met a wonderful woman."
The one bright spot was meeting Tallulah Riley, a British actress who had never heard of Tesla, SpaceX, or Elon Musk. They married in 2010.
I thought he was some sort of hapless engineer that had wandered into a London club, and he just looked so forlorn. He was sort of just sat in a corner on his BlackBerry, and he just looked really out of place and sad. I was, trying to be very sweet to him and sort of humouring him, going, "Oh yes," when he was going, "This is my rocket, and this is my car."
Musk's personal life was looking up, and the future of SpaceX was finally taking off.
We have liftoff.
The fourth attempt to launch the Falcon 1 was a huge success. And 3 months later, NASA rewarded SpaceX with a $1.6 billion contract to resupply the International Space Station. But Musk had no time to celebrate. Tesla was on the verge of financial disaster.
I had to make a choice then that either I took all of the capital that I had left from the sale of PayPal to eBay and invest that in Tesla, or Tesla would die.
The company is really teetering on the brink of failure. And there's this board meeting late in 2008 where they're discussing what's going to happen. And Elon just says, well, I'm going to raise a $40 million round to keep the company going. And the board members are kind of wondering, well, how's he going to do that? And he says, I'm going to put it all in myself.
And that incredible braggadocio confidence catalyzed a change in people's opinion. And we and everyone else around the table was like, oh my gosh, we want to be part of this. We want to get as much of this investment as we can. He saved the company in its darkest hour with an act of heroism that is hard to describe. There's nothing quite like spending your last remaining dollar on a project you believe in.
It was thankfully a good week, but it definitely took its toll from a mental strain standpoint. I think I've mentally just burned out a few circuits.
Just after his emergency cash infusion came the news they desperately needed. A $40 million deal with Daimler for smart car batteries. Daimler later added $50 million for 10% of the company. Determined not to repeat past mistakes, Musk focused on bringing his family car to life.
So I decided, look, we really need to have our own design studio, and that's when I hired Franz von Holzhausen to design the Model S.
His green agenda was irresistible to von Holzhausen. a legendary figure in car design who had already revolutionized the looks of VW, GM, and Mazda.
He's completely passionate to really rid the world of this addiction to fossil fuel. And that was something that he talked about from the very first sentence, first conversation that we had.
With a new team in place, Musk completely revamped the look of the Model S.
A sedan doesn't have to be a brick. It doesn't have to be a big blocky car. We wanted to bring this kind of passion and feeling back to this marketplace. The architecture of Model S is really similar to a skateboard. The floor of the vehicle is the battery pack, and the motors between the rear wheels, and everything above that is the opportunity space.
In March 2009, Musk unveiled the prototype for the Model S. It could hold 7 passengers and as much luggage as a station wagon. But to build it, he knew he needed a piece of the U.S. government's new $7.5 billion loan program to support alternative energy vehicles.
In order for Model S to truly be successful, it was important that the loan come through.
The government funding was controversial. The New York Times writer Randy Strauss called the program the bailout of very, very high net worth individuals who invested in Tesla Motors Act. Musk struck back.
Randy Strauss is a huge douchebag. And an idiot. Okay.
It wasn't a bailout, but a loan. The Obama administration agreed to lend Tesla $465 million to mass produce the Model S, a move that astounded many in the industry.
It's very unlikely that the Tesla investment is ever repaid to the taxpayers. Electric vehicles are really not possible in ways that would be effective for most consumers still. This is just the religion of electric vehicles, and like Jonestown, that religion will come to an end.
There are most certainly people who want to see Tesla fail because it is an attack on the mainstream car industry.
Of course, the biggest impact that Tesla will have is not the cars that we make ourselves, but the fact that we show that you can make compelling electric cars that people really want to buy.
The government loan came with a challenging condition. To get the money, he had to first find a place to build his electric car. Tesla burned through $300 million since 2003. Elon Musk needed to get his Model S into production fast. Ever the risk taker, he took another giant gamble, purchasing a plant in Fremont, California, abandoned by Toyota.
The dream factory location for Tesla was always the NUMMI factory, which was a 50% Toyota, 50% General Motors factory. It's one of the biggest car plants in the world. It's a great location, close to Tesla headquarters.
The reality is, for very little money, Toyota got an Albatross off its books. From an industry perspective, it looked incredibly savvy on Toyota's part and incredibly naive on Tesla's part. Car factories are big pieces of sunk capital. To retool a factory takes a tremendous incremental investment.
The acquisition released the government funds to begin production. Despite the fact that Tesla had posted a profit just once since its founding, Musk took his company public in June 2010.
The smartest money in the world is betting on Tesla.
Not everyone was as upbeat about the company's future.
Tesla stock voted by Wall Street as the least likely to succeed.
You don't want to own this stock. You don't want to lease it. Heck, you shouldn't even rent the darn thing.
There hasn't been an IPO of a car company in America since Henry Ford, and that caught people's attention.
Investors ignored the skeptics. Tesla raised $226 million in its IPO. Musk now had the capital to get rolling on the Model S.
You just saw on his face this sort of just elation and this feeling like all of this suffering is worth it, and it's real now.
3, 2, 1. Take one. Lift off. Falcon 9 has cleared the tower.
In 2010, after winning the $1.6 billion contract from NASA, SpaceX became the first private company to successfully launch and return a spacecraft from orbit.
So SpaceX was the first purely commercial ground-up development to reach orbit.
The first successful launch at SpaceX was an incredibly emotional time.
Falcon 9 Stage 2 and the Dragon capsule are now in orbit around the Earth.
I'm just wishing to any entities that are listening, please bless this launch.
3, 2, 1.
And 2 years later, in May 2012, it made history as the first privately held company to send a cargo payload to the International Space Station. Back on Earth, the long-awaited launch of Tesla's new sedan was also taking off.
It's time to start delivering Model S!
The Model S started rolling off the production line, although questions about range and service remained.
Let him go!
Not everyone was cheering. In a 2012 presidential debate, Republican candidate Mitt Romney blasted President Obama for the government loan to Tesla, lumping Tesla in with other financially troubled green companies.
You put $90 billion, like 50 years worth of breaks into solar and wind, to Solyndra and Fisker and Tesla and Enter1. I mean, I had a friend who said you don't just pick the winners and losers, you pick the losers.
But Tesla was no loser in the eyes of the automotive industry. The Model S was the first electric sedan to win Motor Trend's Car of the Year. Musk didn't have much time to celebrate. A few months later, the New York Times delivered a devastating review of the Model S. It reported the battery died on its test drive from Washington to Boston and published an image no CEO would want.
There was this sad shot of our car on a flatbed, as though that was the only outcome possible for such a drive. And that's just not true.
Musk went on the offensive.
And lots of people said, oh, you know, it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong, you don't battle the New York Times. And it's like, the hell with that.
The battle between the reporter and the renegade CEO ended when the New York Times public editor concluded the reporting was imprecise, but not done in bad faith. But the story didn't affect his bottom line. Remember that loser comment from a presidential candidate about the $465 million government loan?
It really feels good to have repaid the U.S. taxpayer. That's really what's important here. And we didn't just repay the principal, we actually repaid it with interest and a bonus payment. So ultimately the U.S. taxpayer actually made a profit of over $20 million on this loan.
Tesla repaid the loan 9 years ahead of schedule. Never short on optimism or confidence, Musk made a stunning promise for the nearly $70,000 car.
We're guaranteeing that the value of the Model S will be no less than that of a Mercedes S-Class after 3 years. I am personally guaranteeing that value and standing behind that guarantee with all of my assets, not just with Tesla.
He has guaranteed free charging for the life of the car and has expanded the charging system across the country.
You'll be able to travel all the way from LA to New York just using the Tesla Supercharger network. And Supercharger system is free. So it's not just free now, it's free forever. That's the Tesla commitment.
His commitment to customers has paid off. Since its IPO, Tesla shares were up more than 5-fold. SpaceX and Solar City were also turning profits.
And NASA's our biggest and most important customer, but almost 3/4 of our customers are commercial.
SpaceX says it has more than $4 billion in revenue under contract. But of all his companies, perhaps the greatest success was the one addressing the world's energy need. Solar City is now the largest solar service provider in the U.S. and has more than quadrupled in value since its initial public offering in December 2012.
Solar City has been very, very impressive. I mean, there are, thousands of people with panels on their roofs and lots of big offices. I believe eBay has Solar City panels. So it's having a very big, very visible impact on the world.
He really wants to change the world. And in Elon Musk's vision of the future, you'll have clean and renewable sources of energy feeding the grid, and all of our vehicles will run off that. This is really the future. It's something you want to tell stories about.
Elon has a self-confidence that is it's breathtaking. And it's especially breathtaking when you think about the things he's confident about. The idea that humanity is going to get to Mars. That not just humanity is going to get to Mars, but that he, in his lifetime, Elon Musk, will get to Mars.
Crusader or canny businessman. Named one of Time magazine's most influential people in the world, the risk-taking, multitasking CEO's estimated net worth was $6 billion in June 2013. Divorced for the second time, Musk splits his time between his 5 sons, his companies, and thinking about the future.
Just, is it significant? Really, the question is, are things I'm working on, are they really going to matter, or do they have the potential for really mattering?
We're making good progress on the ship and the booster, codenamed BFR.
What does that stand for again?
Well, it's a bit of it's like sort of a Rorschach test in acronym form, but it is very big. Yeah. And I gave a presentation on this at the International Astronautical Congress in Australia last year, and that design is evolving rapidly. We're actually building that ship right now. I think right now that the biggest thing that would be helpful is just general support and encouragement, and goodwill. I think once we build it, there will be we'll have a point of proof, something that other companies and countries can then go and do. Like, they currently don't think it's possible, so if we show them that it is, then I think they'll up their game, and they will build interplanetary transport vehicles as well. Now, once that has been built, and there's a means of getting cargo and people to and from Mars, as well as to and from the Moon, and other places in the solar system, then I think that's really where there's a tremendous amount of entrepreneurial resources that are needed, because you've got to build out the entire base of industry, everything that allows human civilization to exist, and it's going to be harder, a lot harder, in a place like Mars or the Moon.
We need some volunteers to be colonists. Do we have any colonist volunteers here from Mars?
Actually, not many hands raised, by the way. I mean, the Moon and Mars are often thought of as like, is this some escape hatch for rich people? But it won't be that at all. It's anyone who, for the early people that go to Mars, it'll be far more dangerous. I mean, really, it kind of reads like Shackleton's ad for Antarctic explorers. You know, it's like difficult, dangerous, good chance you'll die. Excitement for those who survive. That kind of thing. And I think there's not many people who actually want to go in the beginning, because all those things I said are true. But there'll be some who will, for whom the excitement of the frontier and exploration exceeds the concern of danger. And they will start off building the most elementary infrastructure, just a base to create propellant, a power station, glass domes in which to grow crops, all the sort of fundamentals without which you cannot survive. And then really there's going to be an explosion of entrepreneurial opportunity, because Mars will need everything from iron foundries to pizza joints to nightclubs.
Definitely pizza joints.
I think Mars should really have great bars. You know? The Mars bar. Sorry. Look, I love dad jokes. I'm dad.
What do you think the timeline for this is?
So I'm feeling pretty optimistic about the timeline, although I can be a little. Sometimes my timelines are a little, you know. People have told me that my timelines historically have been optimistic, and so I'm trying to recalibrate to some degree here. But I can tell you what I know currently is the case is that we are building the first ship, the first Mars or interplanetary ship right now, and I think we'll be able to do short flights, short sort of up and down flights, probably sometime in the first half of next year. Now, this is a very big booster and ship. The liftoff thrust of this would be about twice that of a Saturn V. So it's capable of doing 150 metric tons to orbit and be fully reusable. So that the expendable payload is around double that number. So what's amazing about this ship, assuming we can make full and rapid reusability work, is that we can reduce the marginal cost per flight dramatically by orders of magnitude compared to where it is today. This question of reusability is so fundamental to rocketry. It is the fundamental breakthrough that's needed. If you consider aircraft, for example, you can lease a 747 and do a return flight full of cargo from California to Australia for $500,000. That's what it costs to lease a 747 fully round trip to Australia, which is far. To buy a single-engine turboprop plane, a good one, would be about $1.5 million, and that can't even reach Australia, and it's tiny compared to a 747. So what that means is like it costs less to use a giant plane with huge cargo for a long trip than that costs way less than buying a small plane for a short trip in the aircraft world. And the same actually is true of rocketry. A BFR flight will actually cost less than our Falcon 1 flight did back in the day. Wow. So that was about a $5 or $6 million marginal cost per flight. We're confident that BFR will be less than that. So that's profound, and that is what will enable the creation of a permanent base on the moon and a city on Mars. And that's the equivalent of like the Union Pacific Railroad, or having ships that can cross the oceans. Until you can get there, there's no way for all of the entrepreneurial energy to you can't do anything. There's no way for all the flowers to bloom. Once you can get there, the opportunity is immense. So we're going to do our best to get you there, and then make sure that there's an environment in which entrepreneurs can flourish. And then I think it'll be amazing.
A big part of that, and we've talked about this, is inspiring people to look again at this. You know, we were talking about this yesterday. It was our grandparents who went to the moon, and we have not gone back since. You know, in my lifetime, no one's gone to the moon. You and I were having a conversation last year about what to put in Falcon Heavy, and the kind of what's the cargo, and the idea was to use that as an opportunity to inspire people. Again, Carl Sagan had a beautiful thought many years ago that if you just get enough people to look at the Earth from a distance, that it would get them to focus on the problems here and on the possibilities of space exploration. I was fortunate enough to be with you at Launch Control when Falcon Heavy launched a few weeks back, and we made a little movie. We've called it a trailer that sums up that experience. We have it here. We thought we'd play it for you guys again. This is 2 minutes that does a pretty good job of giving you the feeling of what it was like to be there when Falcon Heavy launched. Yeah,
we wanted to get the public. We wanted you to get excited about the possibility of something new happening in space, of the space frontier getting pushed forward. The goal of this was to inspire you and make you believe again, just as people believed in the Apollo era, that anything's possible. Thank you.
Can we play?
We try to confuse the aliens as much as possible. There's if you look carefully, there's also a little Hot Wheels version of the Roadster with a tiny little astronaut in the Hot Wheels Roadster on the dashboard. That was suggested by a friend of ours called Nora. Nora suggested that, and so if you guys have any suggestions, let us know.
I think for me, watching those two boosters come down side by side felt like a transformative moment. It felt like we can do anything. And that's the culmination. I was really struck there by the culmination of, a singular vision and hundreds or thousands of very talented people working together to make sure. I was sitting in launch control and looking at the sheer amount of variables that you guys are clocking in those moments before the launch. Wind speed at different altitudes and the status of all the different 27 engines in that. I mean, how do you manage? You're very hands-on with the details, but you're also looking at the bigger picture. How do you manage your time? How do you parse? How do you zoom in and zoom out and make sure that all these things are coming together?
Well, at SpaceX, almost all my time is spent on engineering and design. It's probably 80 and 90%. And then Gwynn Shotwell, who's president and chief operating officer, takes care of the business operations of the company, which is what allows me to do that. I think in order to make the right decisions, you have to understand something. And if you don't understand something at a detailed level, you cannot make a good decision. But I'd like to just point out, like, what you saw there is a result of an incredible team at SpaceX, super talented people who really work like crazy to make that happen. I think my role is to make sure that they have an environment where they can really, where the talents can really come to the fore, but I can't tell you how honored and grateful I am to work with such a great team.
Everyone in this room is inspired by you. Who are you inspired by?
Well, Kanye West, obviously. That's what you said.
Me too.
Fred Astaire, you should see my dance moves.
We may see some dance moves unless...
I do love Fred Astaire, he's amazing. If you haven't watched his movies, they're amazing.
Yeah. I think for me, when I look at all of the things you've undertaken to do, the commonality is with Tesla, with SpaceX, Silver City, now with the Boring Company. It feels like you're seeing a firmly established and mature industry that is ripe for sort of a quantum shift. There's an opportunity there for, in the case of cars, it's electrification, which drastically changes, the complexity of an automobile and potentially down the line the expense of it. With rockets, it's the reusability of it. With solar, it's about a firmly established energy system that's about to be massively disrupted. This is happening. And with the Boring Company, it's about looking at infrastructure projects which typically take decades and billions of dollars, and looking to reduce the complexity of that. Is that how you see the world? Do you see the things that don't work and can be made better?
No. I don't sort of like look at things and say, okay, what's the rank ordered, business opportunity from a financial standpoint, or anything like that. It's really just like there's some things that don't seem to be working, that are important for for our life and for the future to be good. And I have to say that if one were to say, like, where is if one were to do a risk-adjusted rate of return estimate on various industry opportunities, I would put basically building rockets and cars pretty close to the bottom of the list. That they would have to be the dumbest things to do. Just because you look at the auto industry, And in the U.S. auto industry, the only two companies that haven't gone bankrupt, at least at some point, are Tesla and Ford. Every other company got bankrupt or was failing and got acquired. There's only two companies that haven't gone bankrupt, and there's a big graveyard of companies that did. So, and then you're going up against entrenched competitors. There's no. I gave basically both SpaceX and Tesla from the beginning a probability of less than 10% of likely to succeed.
So why do it?
Well, in the case of SpaceX, I just kept wondering why we were not making progress towards sending people to Mars. Why we didn't have a base on the moon. Where are the sort of space hotels that were promised in 2001 in the movie? It's like, it's just wasn't happening year after year. It was getting me down. I look at the NASA website. I was like, where does it say when we're going to Mars? It doesn't. So initially for SpaceX, for example, I thought, well, the genesis of SpaceX was not to create a company, but really how do we get NASA's budget to be bigger? That was initially the goal. So I came up with this little small philanthropic mission, which would be to send a small greenhouse to the surface of Mars. It's called Mars Oasis. And upon landing, the seeds would be in dehydrated nutrient gel, hydrated upon landing, and you have this little greenhouse. And then the money shot would be, green plants against a red background. So recently learned that money shot has a meaning that I wasn't aware of, but I think that would get people excited about rekindles the spirit of Apollo essentially. And as I got more and more into what it would take to do that, I learned that the fundamental issue is actually the cost of access to space. Rockets were super expensive, and the cost per pound or kilogram to orbit had actually gone up over the years, not down. And it was like, okay, well, it won't matter if we are able to do this philanthropic mission and it generates a lot of will to go to Mars. That's not going to matter if there's no way. So after my second or third trip back from Russia, I was like, whoa, there's got to be a way to build rockets. There's got to be a way to solve this rocket problem. I started reading a lot of books on rockets and did a first principles analysis of a rocket. Just broke down the materials that are in a rocket. What would it cost to buy those materials? What versus the price of the rocket? And there's a gigantic difference between the raw material cost of the rocket and the finished cost of the rocket. So there must be something wrong happening in going from the constituent atoms to the final shape. And I found that certainly to be true. And then why weren't people trying to make reusability work? It was very difficult to make rocket reusability work. And then unfortunately the space shuttle ended up being a counterexample of don't try to make reusability work, because space shuttle ended up costing more per flight than an expendable vehicle of equivalent capability. So for a long time people were using the space shuttle as an example of why reusability is dumb. You can't take a single case example and make an entire theory out of it. So there's no question in my mind that if you could reuse the rockets, it has to be true reuse, which means rapid and complete reuse. The problem with the space shuttle is only a portion of the system came back. Like the big orange tank, which was also the primary airframe, was discarded every time, and the parts that were reused were incredibly difficult to refurbish. So the only kind of reuse that matters is if it's rapid and complete. So that the only thing you're changing between flights, apart from scheduled maintenance, is the propellant. So we embarked upon that journey to create SpaceX in 2002. And in the beginning, I wouldn't even let my friends invest because I didn't want to lose their money. I thought it was like, I'd rather lose my own money. So, and then we almost did die at SpaceX, actually. So I budgeted for 3 flights. I mean, technically, I did have a plan where I had the money from PayPal. I had like about 180 million from PayPal. And I thought, I'll allocate half of that to SpaceX and Tesla and Solar City, and that should be fine. I'll have 90 million, like just lots, you know. But then what happened is things cost more and took longer than I thought. So I had a choice of either put the rest of the money in or the companies are going to die. And it's like, so I ended up putting all the money in and borrowing money for rent from friends. 2008 was brutal. Phew. 2008 we had the third consecutive failure of the Falcon 1 rocket for SpaceX. Tesla almost went bankrupt. We closed our financing round 6 p.m. Christmas Eve 2008. It was the last hour of the last day that it was possible. We would have gone bankrupt 2 days after Christmas otherwise. And I got divorced. That was like rough, man. Permanent scar tissue there.
Well, it poses a question, or maybe you just answer the question of why is no one else doing these things?
What's your pain threshold? Yeah, well, if it's real high. So, yeah, I mean, SpaceX is alive by the skin of its teeth, so is Tesla. If things had just gone a little bit the other way, both companies would be dead. And I like one of the most difficult choices I've ever faced in life was in 2008. I think I had like maybe $30 million left, or $30 or $40 million left in 2008. And I had two choices. I could put it all into one company, and then the other company would definitely die, or split it between the two companies. But if I split it between the two companies, then both might die. And when you put your blood, sweat, and tears into creating something, or building something, it's like a child. And so it's like, which one am I going to let one starve to death? I couldn't bring myself to do it, so I split the money between the two. Fortunately, thank goodness, they both came through.
We've got a question from the audience that builds on that. What was your biggest failure and how did it change you? What was your biggest failure and how did it change you?
Oh, I have to really think hard about that. Like, failure. Never heard of it.
There's your answer.
Well, there's a ton of failures along the way, that's for sure. As I said, for SpaceX, the first 3 launches failed. And we actually were just barely able to scrape together enough parts and money to do the 4th launch. If that 4th launch had failed, we would have been dead. So multiple failures along the way. I tried very hard to get the right expertise in for SpaceX. I tried hard to find a great chief engineer for the rocket, but the good chief engineers wouldn't join, and the bad ones, well, there was no point in hiring them. So I ended up being chief engineer of the rocket. So if I could have found somebody better, then we would have maybe had less than 3 failures.
How do you plan a business where you know, the rocket business, you know some of these things are going to blow up on the launch pad? How does the business plan work?
I don't really have a business plan. Yeah, I haven't had a business. I had a business plan way back in the Zip2 days. But these things are just always wrong. So I just didn't bother with business plans after that. Yeah. I mean, I think, wishful thinking for sure is a source of many problems in many walks of life. Business or personal wishful thinking causes a lot of trouble. You really have to ask, whether something is true or not. Does it make sense? And if it ever feels like too easy, it probably is. But for all the drama of SpaceX, I think Tesla's actually been probably 2/3 of my total drama dose over time. Tesla's a drama magnet. It's crazy.
How do you, I mean, a lot of people want to know, you know, you're managing 3 or 4 companies now, each of them trying to do something revolutionary, each of them challenging a business that has historically been regarded as impossible to challenge or disrupt. How do you prioritize? How do you prioritize between the different companies? How do you prioritize? How do you spend your time?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, can I trouble you for a water? I've got a bit of a cold, so my voice is a bit hoarse. It's okay. In terms of time priority, for business time, almost all of it is really dedicated to SpaceX and Tesla. It may sound like I've got a lot of different endeavors, but it's overwhelmingly SpaceX and Tesla in terms of time allocation. So it's, and then for non-business stuff, it's almost entirely kid stuff. My kids are here today, actually. Brought them along to South by Southwest. Hope they're having a good time. But they went and saw the Westworld exhibit, or it's really amazing. If you haven't seen the Westworld, what do you call it, exhibit or a...
I don't know what you call it. I think you just call it Westworld at this point.
Theme park. It's really incredibly well done. Took the kids there yesterday. They had a great time. But yeah, I think probably one of the biggest misunderstandings is that I'm actually not an investor. Sometimes people think I'm an investor or I invest in things. I don't invest in anything. In fact, the only public security that I own of any kind is Tesla. And then the next biggest is SpaceX. And then the Boring Company kind of started it more as a joke, because that would be a funny name for a company. You know, we put the 0 in bring. I mean, it's sort of like that doesn't make any sense.
But when we talk, I remember when you first told me that you were thinking about tunnels.
And when did I first tell you about that?
Years ago.
Okay, it's like a long time ago.
Yeah,
like,
I thought you were joking.
Yeah, it was. I was joking, but it's not because of some epiphany that I had one day driving down the 405. That's how it gets translated somehow. I was talking about tunnels for years and years. For probably 5 years or 4 years at least, whenever I'd give a talk and people would ask me about what opportunities do you see in the world, I'd say tunnels. Can someone please build tunnels? So after 4 or 5 years of begging people to build tunnels, and still no tunnels, I was like, okay, I want to build a tunnel. Like maybe I'm missing something here. So I was like basically talking people's ears off for tunnels for several years, and then said, well, let's find out what it takes to build a tunnel. And so I started digging a tunnel. I wanted to start the tunnel from where I could see it from my office at SpaceX. So I said, well, let's just carve off a part of the parking lot across the road so I can see if anything's happening or not. And then we named our first boring machine Godot, because I kept waiting for it. It never came. Finally it did. And we got it going. And now we're making good progress. We're funding the company for merchandise sales. So thank you for anyone who's bought our flamethrower. You will not be sorry, or maybe you will. It won't be boring.
We have a video, I think, here of the latest vision for the Boring Company in terms of how it planned, you know, the hopes
cool.
of the
I didn't even know this. Great.
Solution to a problem.
That I invented tunnels.
And I was still holding out hope for the flying car, and then you asked me one simple question that answered the question for me about flying cars kind of forever, which was, would you want your neighbor to have a flying car?
Yes, exactly. This is exactly the question. Oh, you want a flying car? How about everyone around you has a flying car too? Oh, that doesn't sound so good. Yeah.
And I think one of the interesting things about tunneling is it's one of these things that, you know, there's not a lot of market competition there. It's not a, you know, it's something that's ripe for change. So how do you, I remember you talked about the philosophy with Godot was to just keep running it basically until you figured out why it can't run any faster.
Yeah, so, I mean, the Boring Company, to be clear, it's like literally 2% of my time. It's probably 20% of my tweets. But tweets do not correlate to actual time spent. I mean, I sort of just have fun with the Boring Company, but my time allocation is literally about 2%.
Talk about your time allocation. I think one of the things you spend an awful lot of time thinking about, I know, is artificial intelligence. It's something that you and I have as a shared interest, and it's something that our audience is interested in as well. The question here is a lot of experts in AI don't share the same level of concern that you do about the dangers of AI.
Fools.
What
Famous last words.
What specifically do you believe that they don't?
Well, the biggest issue I see with so-called AI experts is that they think they know more than they do. And they think they're smarter than they actually are. In general, we are all much smarter than we think we are, but much less smart, dumber than we think we are, by a lot. So this tends to plague smart people. They just can't. They define themselves by their intelligence, and they don't like the idea that a machine could be way smarter than them. So they discount the idea, which is fundamentally flawed. That's the wishful thinking situation. I'm really quite close to, I'm very close to the cutting edge in AI, and it scares the hell out of me. It's capable of vastly more than almost anyone knows, and the rate of improvement is exponential. You can see this in things like AlphaGo, which went from, in the span of maybe 6 to 9 months, it went from being unable to beat even a reasonably good Go player to then beating the European world champion, who was ranked 600, then beating Lisa Doll 4-5, who had been world champion for many years, then beating the current world champion, then beating everyone while playing simultaneously. Then there was AlphaZero, which crushed AlphaGo 100-0. And AlphaZero just learned by playing itself, and it can play basically any game that you put the rules in for. Whatever rules you give it, just literally read the rules, play the game, and be superhuman for any game. Nobody expected that rate of improvement. If you ask those same experts who think AI is not progressing at the rate that I'm saying, I think you will find that their predictions for things like Go and other AI advancements have their batting average is quite weak. It's not good. We'll see this also with self-driving. I think probably by end of next year, self-driving will encompass essentially all modes of driving and be at least 100 to 200% safer than a person by the end of next year. We're talking like maybe 18 months from now. NHTSA did a study on Tesla's Autopilot version 1, which is relatively primitive, and found that it was a 45% reduction in highway accidents. And that's despite Autopilot 1 being just version 1. Version 2, I think, will be at least 2 or 3 times better. That's the current version that's running right now. So the rate of improvement is really dramatic. We have to figure out some way to ensure that the advent of digital superintelligence is one which is symbiotic with humanity. I think that's the single biggest existential crisis that we face, and the most pressing one.
And how do we do that? I mean, if we take it that it's inevitable at this point, that some version of AI is coming down the line, how do we steer through that?
Well, I'm not normally an advocate of regulation and oversight. I mean, I think one should generally err on the side of minimizing those things. But this is a case where you have a very serious danger to the public. And so therefore there needs to be a public body that has insight and then oversight on to confirm that everyone is developing AI safely. This is extremely important. I think the danger of AI is much greater than the danger of nuclear warheads, by a lot. And nobody would suggest that we allow anyone to just build nuclear warheads if they want. That would be insane. And mark my words, AI is far more dangerous than nukes. Far. So why do we have no regulatory oversight? This is insane.
Well, it's a question you've been asking for a long time. I think it's a question that's come to the forefront over the last year, where you begin to realize that it doesn't necessarily, I think if we've all been focused in on the idea of artificial superintelligence, right, which is clearly a danger, but maybe, a little further out. What's happened over the last year is you've seen what I've been calling artificial stupidity. You're talking about, algorithmic manipulation of social media. Like we're in it now. It's starting to happen. How do we, what's the intervention at this point?
I'm not really all that worried about the short-term stuff. Things that are, like narrow AI is not a species-level risk. It will result in dislocation, in lost jobs, and sort of better weaponry and that kind of thing. But it is not a fundamental species-level risk, whereas digital superintelligence is. So it's really all about laying the groundwork to make sure that if humanity collectively decides that creating digital superintelligence is the right move, then we should do so very, very carefully. Very, very carefully. This is the most important thing that we could possibly do.
Yeah. Building on that, other than AI and the other issues that you're tackling, transportation, energy production, aerospace, what issues should our next generation of leaders be focused on solving? What else is coming down the line?
Well, I mean, there are other things that are on a longer time scale. And obviously the things that I believe in, like extending life beyond Earth, making life multiplanetary. I'm a big believer in sort of Asimov's Foundation series, or the principle that you really want to, I recommend reading the Foundation series, but it's like if you know that there's likely to be, we don't know, but there's likely to be another Dark Ages, which it seems, my guess is there probably will be at some point. I'm not predicting that we're about to enter Dark Ages, but that there's some probability that we will, particularly if there's a Third World War. Then we want to make sure that there's enough of a seed of human civilization somewhere else to bring civilization back, and perhaps shorten the length of the Dark Ages. I think that's why it's important to get a self-sustaining base, ideally on Mars, because Mars is far enough away from Earth that a war on Earth, the Mars base might survive. It's more likely to survive than a moon base. But I think a moon base and a Mars base that could perhaps help regenerate life back here on Earth would be really important, and to get that done before a possible World War III. Last century we had 2 massive world wars, 3 if you count the Cold War. I think it's unlikely that we will never have another World War again. There probably will be at some point.
Or if we have another one, it'll be the last.
Yeah, it just could be radioactive rubble. So, again, I'm not predicting. It just seems like, well, if you say given enough time, will it be? Most likely, given enough time. This has been our pattern in the past. Like I really believe in the zeroth law, of Asimov's zeroth law. You take the set of actions most likely to support humanity into the future. But I think sustainable energy is also obviously really important. That's tautological. If it's not sustainable, it's unsustainable.
Yeah, how close are we to solving that problem?
Well, I think that the core technologies are there with the wind, solar, with batteries. The fundamental problem is that there's an unpriced externality in the cost of CO2. The market economics works very well if things are priced correctly, but when things are not priced correctly, and something that has a real cost has zero cost, then that's where you get distortions in the market that inhibit the progress of other technologies. So essentially anything that produces carbon, it puts carbon into the atmosphere, which includes rockets, by the way, so I'm not excluding rockets from this. There has to be a price. And that you can start off with a low price, but then that price, and then depending upon whether that price has any effect on the parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, you can adjust that price up or down. But in the absence of a price, we sort of pretend that digging trillions of tons of fossil fuels from deep under the earth and putting it into the atmosphere, we're pretending that has no probability of a bad outcome. And the entire scientific community is saying, obviously, it's going to have a bad outcome. Obviously, you're changing the chemical constituency of the atmosphere. So, so it's really up to people and governments to put a price on carbon, and then automatically the right thing happens. It's really straightforward.
What do we do with the carbon that's already out there?
I actually think we can manage with the current carbon level, or even a little bit higher. It's and this is going to sound like I'm backtracking, but there's actually an argument that more carbon in the atmosphere is actually good, but up to a point. So we might actually arguably have been a little carbon starved. If you go back 200 years ago and say, okay, well, a few hundred years ago, we had like 280, 290 parts per million of carbon. We're probably a little carbon starved. Now we're about 400, just past 400 mark. I think somewhere in the 400s, probably okay. We don't have to worry about sequestering carbon or anything like that. But now, if this momentum keeps going, and we start going up to 600, 800, 1,000, 1,500, that's where things get really squirrely. The sheer momentum of the world's energy infrastructure is leading us in that direction. So it's just very important that the public and the governments push to ensure that the correct price of carbon is paid. So that will be the thing that matters. Yeah.
Our audience is very interested in knowing how many hours of sleep you got last night.
I don't know, about 5 or 6, I think. 5? I don't know.
I feel like we know part of the answer to this because you were trapped in Westworld for a while. But how? I mean, on a regular day for you, are you sleeping? You're not sleeping a lot, right?
Oh, geez, do I look that bad?
No. You look great.
Oh,
but
thanks.
we just imagine with the amount of responsibilities, with the amount of with what you've got going on, do these problems still keep you up at night, or do you think we're on our way to solving them?
Well, right now the only things that are really stressing me out in a big way are AI, obviously. That's like always there, and I'm working really hard on Tesla Model 3 production, we're making good progress, but it's hugely hard work. But those are the two most stressful things in my life right now. Yeah.
Our audience really wants to know, what do you hope the world will look like for children born today when they're your age?
When, sorry?
What do you hope for the world to look like? What's the best case scenario? Say we solve these problems. What's that world look like?
Let's see. So I think a good picture would look like, we really substantially transferred to sustainable generation and consumption of electricity, so that the CO2 risk and the ocean rising risk is mitigated. And we're not looking at, like, having Florida and sort of large portions of the world underwater. That'd be great. Not to have addressed that risk. That'd be enormous. For us to have a base on the moon, base on Mars, to be out there exploring the solar system, start building industry on, essentially having human civilization go out there, and have it be such that anyone can go to the moon or Mars or out to the solar system if they want, making it really affordable. I do think it's important that there's competition, that there are multiple companies doing this, not just SpaceX, and that AI risk is that I guess there's sort of a benign AI, and that we're able to achieve a symbiosis with that AI. Ideally, the AI. There's somebody who, I can't remember his name, but had a good suggestion for what the optimization of the AI should be. What's its utility function? You have to be careful about this, because you say maximize happiness, and the AI concludes that happiness is a function of dopamine and serotonin, so it captures all humans and jacks your brain with large amounts of dopamine and serotonin. Like, okay, it's not what we meant.
It sounds pretty good, though.
Oh, you'll love it. Well, I like the definition of, like, the AI should try to maximize the freedom of action of humanity. Maximize the freedom of action. Maximize freedom, essentially. I like that definition. But we do want a close coupling between collective human intelligence and digital intelligence. And Neuralink is trying to help in that regard by creating an interface between, a high bandwidth interface between AI and human brain. We're already a cyborg in the sense that your phone and your computer are kind of an extension of you.
Just low bandwidth input output.
Exactly, it's just low bandwidth, particularly output. I mean, 2 thumbs basically.
So how do we solve that problem?
The bandwidth thing?
The bandwidth issue. I mean, we've all succumbed to it now. We're all cyborgs. We're just low efficiency cyborgs. So how do we make it better?
I think we've got to build an interface. Like, we didn't evolve to have a communications jack, or some. So there's got to be essentially vast numbers of tiny electrodes that are able to read write from your brain. Of course, security is pretty important in this situation, to say the least.
I was going to say, I'm not coming with. I'm keeping my brain air-gapped.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people will choose to do that. But it's a bit like Ian Banks' neural lace. But in the case of neural lace, it's sort of that's there from when you're born, or it's more of a
backup.
Sorry?
It's a backup.
Yeah, kind of a backup. This would be, there's a digital extension of you that is an AI, the AI extension of you, a tertiary layer of intelligence. So you've got your limbic system, your cortex, and the tertiary layer, which is the digital AI extension of you. And that high bandwidth connection is what achieves a tight symbiosis. I think that's the best outcome. I hope so. If anybody's got better ideas, I'd love to hear it.
We're talking about another project that you're working on that our audience wants to know a little bit more about, Starlink.
Oh.
Can you tell us anything?
Do you mean Skynet?
Hopefully not Skynet.
It's an internet in the sky. Well, we don't talk that much about Starlink, but essentially it's intended to provide low latency, high bandwidth internet connectivity throughout the world. There actually will not be enough cognitive processing power on board the satellite system to in any way be a Skynet thing. Like, it's digital AI requires a lot of superintelligence requires a lot of big servers on the ground. It's too power intensive. But this is intended to provide people with who don't have any internet connectivity with internet connectivity, and it's very good for sparse and sparsely populated, moderately sparsely populated areas, and for giving people in cities a choice of low-cost choice of internet access. But I do think it's going to be important. The Starlink system will be important in providing the funding necessary for SpaceX to develop interplanetary spacecraft, and at the same time, helping people who have either no or super expensive connectivity and giving people in urban areas more of a competitive choice.
Very cool. I have to ask you because it's the number one question. Just going back to Mars, what kind of government do you envision for the first Martian colony?
We have to be careful
and what's your title?
Yeah, exactly. Emperor or God Emperor? I don't know. It might be too much. I don't know. If you watch my jokes here, not everyone gets irony. Must remember. So I think I think most likely the form of government on Mars would be somewhat of a direct democracy, where you vote on issues, where people vote directly on issues, instead of going through representative government. When the United States was formed, representative government was the only thing that was logistically feasible, because there was no way for people to communicate instantly. A lot of people didn't even have really access to mailboxes, or there wasn't even really the post office was very, very primitive. A lot of people couldn't write. So you had to have some form of representative democracy, or things just wouldn't work at all. But I think on Mars, most likely it's going to be everyone votes on every issue, and that's how it goes. There are a few things I'd recommend, which is keep laws short. Long laws, it's like that's something suspicious is going on if there's a long law. If the size of the law exceeds the word count of Lord of the Rings, which it does, amazingly, then it's like something's wrong. So there should be a limit to the size of the law that you should be able to digest it. Like, how come you can read the Constitution and all of the amendments, like you can read those in maybe an hour? And we govern so much of our civilization by that, and yet modern law is this obtuse, super boring tome that's indecipherable to almost anyone. So I think direct democracy, laws that are comprehensible. I think having some kind of hysteresis on, like, it should be easier to remove a law than create one, because things just get to inertia. You have to have something that's going to overcome inertia. So probably, I don't know what the right number would be, maybe it's like 60-40. Maybe it requires 60% to get a law in place, but any number above 40% can remove a law. Otherwise, you just get laws just accumulate over time, and it's sort of like Gulliver, where you just get trapped by all these tiny strings and you can't move. You get hardening of the arteries of civilization with rules and rules and rules and rules. So it should be just easier to get rid of a rule than to put one in. Maybe they should even have like some kind of sunset clause, so that they just automatically expire unless there's enough of an impetus to keep them around.